Living near the water had always been my dream. As a commander in the Coast Guard, I'd spent most of my career out at sea, and when it came time to relax, I wanted peace and quiet near the waves. Eventually, I found the perfect spot, a house in a gated community with its own small private dock. It was everything I'd hoped for, especially the dock where I kept my pride and joy, a brand new, fully equipped fishing boat. Sleek, modern, and built for adventure, it was more than a hobby, it was a lifestyle. But paradise, as it turned out, came with one major flaw. A certain neighbor had taken it upon herself to become the self-declared ruler of the community. From the day she moved in, she was a constant source of irritation. She complained about everything, especially my boat. First, she said it ruined the look of the neighborhood, not fitting with her idea of how the docks should look. Then she started talking about how unfair it was that I had access to a private dock while others didn't. Her jealousy was obvious, but I tried to ignore her. People like her thrived on attention, and I'd learned long ago the best way to deal with them was to give them none. Unfortunately, people like her don't stop when they're ignored, they escalate. That's exactly what she did. One quiet weekend, I woke up early, ready to head to the dock and perform some routine maintenance before taking the boat out. The moment I reached the dock, a strange coldness swept over me, the kind that signals something gone horribly wrong. I stood frozen, staring in disbelief. My boat was gone. My heart dropped. For a moment, I convinced myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe someone from the condo association had moved it. Maybe there was an emergency I hadn't been told about. But the sight of the cut mooring ropes destroyed that illusion. My boat hadn't been moved, it had been stolen. Now most people might panic in this situation, but not me. As a Coast Guard officer, I've faced storms, rescues, and dangerous missions. I don't panic, I act. And the first thing I asked myself was, who would be dumb enough to steal a boat from a Coast Guard commander? Just then, I got my answer. My neighbor, Mr. Thompson, called out, casually mentioning that he saw the woman from the HOA leave earlier on my boat. My heart skipped a beat. That woman, the same one who constantly complained about the boat, she had the audacity to steal it. My shock quickly turned to anger. She had crossed a line, and now I was going to make sure she learned just how serious a mistake she'd made. I grabbed my phone and opened the tracker app. Of course, my boat had a tracker. It wasn't just a toy. It was a high-performance machine. Within seconds, the screen showed me its exact location. There it was, drifting farther and farther from the shore, clearly out of control. I cursed under my breath. She not only stole it, she had no idea how to drive it. I jumped in my vehicle and headed straight to the Coast Guard base. If she thought she could mess with me, she had no clue what was coming. I called a buddy of mine on duty and filled him in. He burst out laughing when I told him the HOA lady had taken my boat. "This is going to be good," he chuckled. Minutes later, we were suiting up for what would become one of the most satisfying rescues of my career, and she had no idea what was headed her way. The moment we got the patrol boat ready, I took command of the operation. Lucky for her, I was the one leading it. Anyone else would have treated her like a full-on criminal from the start. I had something different in mind. As we sped across the water toward the coordinates, I couldn't help but imagine the panic she must be in. She had no training, no sea experience, and was out in open water on a boat she didn't even know how to operate. We followed the tracker, the signal growing stronger as we approached, and then we saw it. A boat spinning in circles, completely out of control. She was alone, and from the distance, we could already hear her screaming. The scene was pure chaos, but to us, it was almost hilarious. She had clearly panicked, holding onto the steering wheel like it might explode at any second. We tuned into the boat's radio frequency and tried to make contact. I grabbed the mic, trying not to laugh, and spoke calmly. "This is the United States Coast Guard. Identify yourself immediately." All we heard back was her terrified voice, shouting, oh my God, get me out of here. The boat is broken." That was a lie. The boat wasn't broken. She just had no clue what she was doing. We moved in closer. Her face was soaked in sweat, hair tangled in the wind, clinging to the console with wide, frantic eyes. The moment she spotted me on the patrol boat, her expression changed completely. The arrogance she carried back at the neighborhood meetings vanished. Her face turned pale, and the fear in her eyes told me she realized exactly how badly she'd messed up. As we pulled alongside her, she didn't wait for instructions. "Help, please, the boat's broken. It won't go back to land." She yelled again. I kept a straight face, but deep down, I was loving every second of this. I stepped closer, radio in hand, and spoke in my official voice. "This is the Coast Guard. You are in possession of a vessel that does not belong to you. Are you aware of that?" She blinked like a fish out of water, completely stunned, and stammered. I just borrowed it. It was just a quick ride." That's when I finally let out a dry laugh. "Borrowed it? Usually people who borrow something don't cut the ropes and sneak away." Her eyes widened. She had no defense. One of my crew members couldn't help it and laughed over the radio. Still, I stayed composed. "You are currently in possession of a boat that isn't yours. You did not have permission. You are operating in open waters untrained and without proper equipment. Do you understand what this means legally?" She stared at me, panicked, her voice barely a whisper. "No, this is ridiculous. I'm a respectable citizen. You can't treat me like this." Ah, yes, the classic respectable citizen defense, as if the law only applies to certain people. I replied flatly, "We're boarding your vessel now. I suggest you keep your hands visible and fully cooperate." She froze, completely at our mercy. Her eyes darted around, but she knew there was nowhere to run. My team moved efficiently, boarding her without drama. She offered no resistance, just silent surrender. The next phase was taking her back to land, and believe me, that was going to be even more satisfying. As she sat quietly on the patrol boat, on my boat, her whole attitude had vanished. That smug, self-righteous personality she flaunted in the HOA meetings, gone. Now she looked like a drenched kitten, silently replaying every decision that led to this moment. We assigned one of our crew members to take control of the stolen boat and steer it back. He handled it smoothly, showing her how easy it was when someone actually knew what they were doing. She watched, speechless, realizing how foolish she had been claiming the boat was broken. The ride back was silent. She didn't even try to argue. Her brain was working overtime, trying to figure out how to spin this into some kind of misunderstanding. But there was no spin that could undo what she had done. Not this time. When we finally reached the dock, she looked like she might collapse. Waiting for us was a uniformed officer, clipboard in hand, ready to log the incident officially. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug or treated like a casual neighborly dispute. No, this was a full-blown, reportable offense. She stiffened as the reality hit. "I can't be arrested," she blurted out, her voice shaking. "This will ruin my reputation." Oh, how I wanted to respond with something sharp, but I held back. I didn't need to say a word. The officer took over, explaining her situation like it was just another day at the office. "You are not under arrest," he told her firmly, "but you are required to give a statement at the station, and the boat's owner," he gestured toward me, "has every right to file a formal complaint." She turned toward me, eyes wide with desperation. "You're not going to do that, are you? It was just a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. She really had the nerve to call cutting my boat's mooring ropes and sailing off into open water a misunderstanding. She still tried to argue, fumbling through excuses about how she thought she could borrow it and how she didn't know it was a crime. As if anyone could seriously believe that. I didn't need to put up a sign that said, "Don't steal this boat." Common sense should have been enough, but people like her always think they're the exception to the rules. They believe rules are meant for everyone else, not them. Still, I kept my cool. The situation was speaking for itself, and her humiliation was doing more damage than anything I could say. She stood there, cornered by her own arrogance, her words failing as quickly as her excuses. There was no smooth talk or HOA title that could get her out of this. Of course, the next few days were filled with her trying to undo the damage. First, she sent me a series of messages, apologizing without really apologizing. She wanted to resolve things amicably and avoid unnecessary complications. Then she went to the HOA, hoping they'd back her up and pressure me to withdraw the complaint. That didn't go how she hoped. They may have tolerated her in the past, but stealing a boat, especially one belonging to a Coast Guard commander, was a bit much, even for them. And when none of that worked, she tried the last move she had left, offering me money to make things right. But this wasn't about money anymore. This was about accountability. I made it clear I was going forward with legal action, and I followed through. I pressed charges and the case proceeded. In court, the facts were undeniable. The cut ropes, the GPS tracking, the unauthorized use, all of it painted a crystal-clear picture. She had stolen my boat, endangered herself and others, and lied about it every step of the way. Unsurprisingly, she lost the case. The court ordered her to pay damages, cover legal fees, and most satisfyingly, she was officially banned from approaching me, my property, or my boat again. But perhaps the worst punishment for her wasn't in court, it was social. The news of what she'd done spread through the community like wildfire. The woman who once strutted around like queen of the HOA became the neighborhood joke. Her precious reputation destroyed. People stopped greeting her. No one wanted to be seen talking to her. Invitations disappeared and whispers followed her everywhere she went. And then came the final blow. She lost her position on the HOA board. Apparently, even in a luxury community, stealing a neighbor's boat doesn't earn you votes of confidence. Her downfall was swift and complete. Just a few months after the incident, a quiet for sale sign appeared in front of her house. No announcement, no goodbye party, no concerned neighbors asking where she was going, just silence. The woman who once inserted herself into everyone's business, who thought she ran the neighborhood, simply vanished, and no one missed her. She packed up and left like a shadow, slipping away with whatever dignity she had left. The truth was, her influence, her fake politeness, her endless complaints, all of it had evaporated the moment she decided to play pirate with my boat. I carried on with my life without a hiccup. My boat, the same one she had so clumsily hijacked, sat securely back at its dock, now guarded by a new, reinforced security system. Honestly, it wasn't even necessary anymore. After what happened, no one would dare come near it without thinking twice. If her story served any purpose, it was to remind people that there are consequences, real heavy consequences, for messing with the wrong person. Especially someone who spent his life rescuing people from dangerous waters and knew the law like the back of his hand. As the weeks passed, the buzz around her incident turned into a cautionary tale. Neighbors would whisper about her whenever someone brought up HOA drama. "Remember what happened to her?" they'd say. And just like that, she became a punchline, an example of arrogance colliding headfirst with reality. It was ironic. She wanted to be remembered in the community as a leader, a figure of control. But the only legacy she left behind was a story everyone told, shaking their heads and laughing at the absurdity of it all. Her name became shorthand for overstepping your boundaries. Personally, I didn't revel in her downfall. I didn't need to. I had already got everything I wanted, the boat back, justice served, and peace restored to my little corner of the world. It felt good knowing that I had done things the right way. I hadn't lost my temper or taken matters into my own hands. I let the facts and the law do the work, and it all fell into place better than I could have scripted. There's a certain satisfaction in watching someone who always thought they were untouchable learn the hard way that they're not. After she left, a new neighbor eventually moved into her place. Quiet, respectful, no complaints about boats or docks. We exchanged friendly waves from time to time, but nothing more, just the way I liked it. Peaceful, drama-free living. That's all I ever wanted when I bought the house in this community. I didn't ask for conflict or attention. I just wanted to be left alone to enjoy my boat, the water, and the occasional weekend trip out at sea. Now, finally, I had that again. No yelling over fences. No unsolicited opinions about what I could or couldn't do with my property. Looking back, it's almost funny how it all unfolded. That she actually thought she could steal a boat and just cruise around like it was hers. That she believed somehow she was above the rules everyone else followed. And the best part? The moment she saw me pulling up in the Coast Guard patrol boat, realizing who she'd messed with, that moment will stay with me forever. It was the look of a person who knew she had completely, irreversibly blown it. A moment of panic frozen in time. A moment I wouldn't trade for anything. There's something uniquely satisfying about justice served cold. The kind that doesn't need yelling, threats, or revenge, just facts, timing, and a little help from the law. That day on the water, as we approached her spinning in circles like a lost duckling, I didn't need to raise my voice or say much at all. Her actions had already written the story. The embarrassment, the panic, the complete loss of composure, she did that to herself. And watching someone who built their identity around control suddenly lose it all in front of witnesses. That was a kind of poetic balance the universe rarely delivers so perfectly. After she was escorted to shore and given her warning, she didn't say a word. She simply sat on the edge of the dock, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to disappear. I watched as the officer walked her through her rights and explained what the next steps would be. Her face didn't show defiance anymore, only fear and confusion. It wasn't that she didn't understand what was happening. She just couldn't believe it was happening to her. And that's the issue with people like her. They live their lives thinking consequences are for other people. She later tried to spin the story to anyone who would listen. It was all a big mix-up, she claimed. I thought the boat was available, but no one bought it. Everyone knew she'd been complaining about that boat since day one. Everyone had heard her opinions loud and clear at every HOA meeting. Her obsession with the dock, the aesthetics, the unfairness of my boat being allowed there, it was no secret. So when she claimed she didn't know it was mine, or that she thought she had permission, even the most polite neighbors just smiled and nodded until she walked away. But it didn't stop her from trying. First, she begged the HOA to intervene, trying to convince them that this was all an overreaction. She said I should have just accepted her apology and let it go. When that didn't work, she started showing up at community events again, pretending nothing had happened, acting as if everyone had just moved on. But they hadn't. Conversations died when she approached. People turned their backs politely but firmly. The judgment wasn't loud. It was quiet, persistent, and far more painful. The same community she tried to dominate now wanted nothing to do with her. At one point, she sent me a handwritten letter, pages long. She tried to explain that she was going through a hard time, that she'd made a bad decision, and that she hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive her. She even threw in a veiled compliment about my professionalism during the rescue, as if that would smooth things over. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I believed she needed to face what she'd done without the safety net of being forgiven too quickly. Accountability wasn't cruelty, it was necessary. Meanwhile, I got a call from the legal office confirming that the charges were officially moving forward. She would have to pay damages, including the cost of repairing the cut ropes, a service inspection for the boat, and legal expenses. More than that, the ruling included a restraining order. She couldn't come near my dock, my boat, or my property for any reason, and I wasn't the one who asked for that. The judge reviewed the case and decided it on their own. That's how serious they considered her actions. This wasn't some neighborhood spat, it was theft. Reckless, dangerous theft. The restraining order changed everything for her. She couldn't even walk by my dock without violating it, which meant avoiding an entire section of the community. It was like watching someone become a ghost in their own home. Once she realized how far-reaching the consequences were, she started unraveling. People noticed. She stopped attending HOA meetings altogether, avoided eye contact when passing by neighbors, and her once overconfident presence had vanished. It was almost hard to believe this was the same woman who used to walk around like she owned the place. Now, she couldn't even show her face without being reminded of her mistake. She did everything she could to regain control of the narrative. She complained quietly that I had overreacted, that the punishment didn't fit the crime, and that I was somehow being vindictive. But the facts were still stacked against her, and no amount of sympathy-seeking could change them. Everyone remembered that she had cut the boat's ropes deliberately and sailed off without permission. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a deliberate, entitled act, and no amount of backpedaling could soften that truth. Every neighbor she tried to convince just nodded and avoided getting involved. No one wanted to be pulled into her spiral. Eventually, her name came up during an HOA election. Someone joked about her trying to run again, and the laughter that followed made it clear she would never hold a position of authority in the community again. That hit her hard. She built her identity around control, around being in charge of neighborhood rules and enforcement. But after this, she didn't even have a voice. Her fall wasn't just legal, it was social, personal, and complete. Her only option left was to fade into the background and hope everyone forgot. But people don't forget a theft, especially not one as ridiculous and public as this. Then came the final act. Her house went on the market quietly without fanfare or notice. It was clear she was done trying to salvage her reputation. The whispers around the neighborhood turned into casual confirmation. Yep, she's leaving, people would say, often with relief in their tone. She packed up her things and left just as silently as she arrived. No one helped her. No one offered a goodbye. It was like the community exhaled all at once, finally rid of the tension she brought with her. She had walked into our peaceful neighborhood like a storm, and now, just as quickly, she was gone. In her absence, the calm returned. No more anonymous HOA complaints about aesthetic violations. No more whispered threats about boat restrictions or property rules. It was as if the air itself felt lighter. The community went back to being what it always was, a quiet, respectful place where people minded their own business. And I I went back to my dock, started up my boat, and took it out for long, peaceful rides, the ocean stretching wide and quiet in front of me. No tension, no drama, just the waves and the sky, just the way it should have been all along. Still, I never let my guard down again. The boat's security system was upgraded, the dock cameras re-angled for a clearer view, and a new locking mechanism installed. Not because I expected another thief, but because experience had taught me that even in gated communities, entitlement can rear its head where you least expect it. But after everything that had happened, I was prepared. And if anyone ever thought about repeating her mistake, they'd quickly learn the same lesson she did. The sea doesn't forgive, and neither does the law. Time passed, and life went back to normal, or at least my version of it. I resumed my weekend routines, spending quiet mornings doing light maintenance on the boat, and heading out to sea for a few hours when the weather allowed. The water was my peace, my space to reset from the pressures of my profession. And now that the dock drama had disappeared, it felt like the balance I'd been missing had finally returned. Still, every time I walked down to that dock, I couldn't help but glance at the spot where the ropes had been cut, a reminder etched into the wood and into memory. Neighbors began to treat me a little differently, not in a bad way, but with a quiet respect. They knew what had happened, and they appreciated how I'd handled it. I didn't boast or stir drama, and I didn't turn the situation into a circus. I followed protocol, stayed composed, and let justice take care of the rest. It earned me a kind of unspoken trust in the community. People started greeting me more warmly, asking for advice on small things, sometimes even about neighborhood disputes. I didn't mind. If anything, it gave me a clearer view of who actually respected the values of living peacefully beside one another. And that was the silver lining in all this. Yes, the ordeal was frustrating, and yes, it could have ended very differently if she hadn't been caught in time. But in the end, it strengthened the fabric of the community. People were reminded that actions have consequences, that you can't trample over others just because you feel entitled, and that, sometimes, quiet people can make the loudest impact when pushed. I had no intention of being some neighborhood enforcer, but it felt good knowing that by standing my ground, others felt safer in standing theirs. Eventually, the story of the stolen boat turned into a kind of urban legend within the neighborhood. New residents heard whispers about the HOA lady who messed with the wrong boat and asked around for the details. I never gave them much, just a smirk and a vague, "Let's just say it didn't end well for her." That seemed to satisfy their curiosity while preserving just enough mystery. But anyone who spent more than a week in the community knew the full story. Her name became a warning, not through malice, but through memory. And memory has a way of sticking when the lesson is clear. One Saturday afternoon, while returning from a peaceful fishing trip, I passed by the old house she used to own. The new family had moved in, a young couple with a toddler and a golden retriever. They'd put up a swing in the front yard and planted new flowers along the porch. The energy was different now, warm, light, welcoming. It was as if the place had finally been allowed to breathe again. I smiled as I walked past, nodding at the father who was setting up a grill. He waved back with the kind of neighborly gesture that had been missing for too long. That night I sat on the back deck with a coffee in hand, watching the horizon fade into the deep blues of twilight. The wind was calm, the dock silent except for the gentle creaking of the tied ropes, secure, still uncut. That sense of peace wasn't something I took for granted anymore. It had been tested, disturbed, and nearly stolen, but I had taken it back. And now it felt more valuable than ever. Sometimes it takes a storm to appreciate calm. And sometimes it takes someone else's stupidity to reinforce your own principles. Looking back now, the whole incident feels like something out of a strange dream, one of those stories people tell years later and wonder if it really happened. But it did happen, and the lesson it carried was real and lasting. Some people walk through life thinking the rules don't apply to them, that status or attitude is enough to bend reality to their will. She was one of those people, so used to control, so sure of her self-importance, that she believed she could just take a boat, cut the ropes, and sail away like it was nothing. But reality caught up with her fast, and it hit hard. The law doesn't care about HOA titles, the sea doesn't care about your reputation, and I certainly didn't care about her excuses. What mattered was that she'd crossed a very clear line. She violated my space, my property, and put herself and potentially others in danger, all while thinking she was above reproach. But actions like that don't just vanish. They come back with weight, with consequences. She thought it was a harmless little cruise. But in the eyes of the law and the community, it was theft, plain and simple. And her fall from grace wasn't dramatic or fiery. It was quiet, humiliating, and final. Today, the dock stands quiet. My boat rests there, secure and untouched, just as it should be. The reinforced security systems are still in place, not because I expect trouble, but because preparedness is part of who I am. It's second nature when you spend your life in the Coast Guard. I still take the boat out on weekends, feeling the rush of the wind and the slap of the waves as I cut through the water. But now, there's something even more peaceful about those trips, because I know the chaos has been cleared, and the waters are calm again in more ways than one. Every now and then, someone from the community stops by the dock to chat, asking about the boat or my service or even that infamous story. I give them the short version, enough to get the message across without turning it into gossip. The message is simple: respect what isn't yours, understand your limits, and don't mistake someone's silence for weakness. I'm not the type to cause trouble, but I won't back down when wronged. That's not just how I was trained, it's how I live. And if nothing else, I hope her story serves as a reminder to others that entitlement never ends well. Her face that day on the water still lingers in my memory. The raw panic, the wide eyes, the realization that she had pushed too far. She never apologized sincerely, never owned up to the weight of what she'd done. But the silence of her departure, the emptiness she left behind, said everything. She lost the respect of an entire community. She lost her role, her voice, her comfort zone. And in the end, she lost her home, all because she thought she could bend reality to her will. But reality doesn't bend. It pushes back, especially when you try stealing a Coast Guard officer's boat. So I continue on, living my quiet life by the water. The HOA is calm now, the neighbors friendly, and the air feels lighter. The storm has passed. And while I don't wish her any harm, I do hope she learns something from it all. That the world doesn't revolve around her, that the rules matter. And that sometimes the consequences come not in anger or revenge, but in the shape of a patrol boat, a lawsuit, and a community that remembers exactly what kind of person you really are. And that, in the end, is the justice that lasts.